The cold winds howled through the dungeons of King's Landing, carrying with them the stench of fear and betrayal. Ned Stark, once Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North, knelt on the rough stone floor, his wrists shackled, his honor battered. He had expected death. He had made peace with it. But death did not come. Instead, a shadow in the form of Lord Varys appeared one night, whispering through the darkness. "You are needed, Lord Stark," Varys had said, his voice like silk slipping. "Over a blade. There are greater wars to come, greater threats. You dying now would only serve the vanity of the boy king and the pride of a broken realm." At first, Ned had refused. He had been ready to die if it meant his daughters might be spared. But Varys spoke of something else, of an arrangement, a deal brokered by those who saw farther than petty thrones and childish games. If Ned agreed to abandon his title, take the Black, and swear loyalty to the Night's Watch, his life would be spared, his family would be left untouched. It wasn't honor, it wasn't justice, but it was survival. On the day of his supposed execution, under the searing gaze of thousands, Ned Stark knelt before Joffrey Baratheon. His voice, hoarse but steady, rang out through the square. "I confess to treason." Sansa Stark sobbed in the arms of Queen Cersei. Arya, hidden among the crowd by Yoren of the Night's Watch, gripped needles so hard her fingers bled. Joffrey, cruel and spoiled, had wanted blood. He demanded it, but Cersei intervened. At the last moment, pressing her hand tightly on the boy king's shoulder and whispering fiercely. So instead of Sir Ilinpain's sword finding Ned's neck, a proclamation was made. Lord Eddard Stark would take the Black and serve at the wall for the rest of his days. His lands and titles were forfeit. The crowd roared in anger. They had come for blood and instead were given mercy. But mercy in King's Landing always came with a cost. Escorted roughly by gold cloaks, Ned was thrown into a filthy cell once more. But now there was a different kind of weight pressing on him. Not fear, not despair, but the heavy burden of survival. What kind of man would he be now, living without honor, serving in a place meant for thieves, bastards, and broken men? The journey north was brutal. Ned was paraded like a criminal through towns that once hailed his name. Whispers followed him like flies. Traitor, they called him. Coward. He bore it all in silence. He thought of Robb, who surely now would be gathering banners in the north. He thought of Catelyn, her proud face crumpling in grief. He thought of Bran, of Rickon, of his daughters trapped like birds in a gilded cage. Winter was coming, and he was alive. At Castle Black, the wall loomed over him, a monstrous slab of ancient ice, cutting the world in half. It seemed almost fitting that this would be his tomb, cold and unyielding. Jeor Mormont, Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, received him with a mixture of respect and wariness. "We don't often get lords here, Stark," Mormont said, his voice rumbling deep in his chest. "You'll find the wall doesn't care much for titles." Ned bowed his head. "I am no lord," he said quietly. "Not anymore." Among the Black brothers, Ned found a strange kind of acceptance, men judged by deeds, not birth. Thieves and bastards looked at him not with awe but suspicion as one of their own. And slowly, piece by piece, Ned began to rebuild what had been shattered. But across the icy expanse beyond the wall, darker things stirred. Wildlings spoke of a king rising in the far north. Strange disappearances, shadows moving in the endless snow. And Ned Stark, who had survived the vipers of King's Landing, began to sense that surviving his own execution was just the beginning. Winter was no longer coming. It was here. The nights at the wall were colder than anything Ned Stark had ever known, even after all his years in the north. The cold didn't just bite the skin, it clawed at the soul. Every breath was a struggle. Every step felt heavier, but Ned endured it the way he always had, with quiet strength. Castle Black was a different world, rough and raw. No lords and ladies, no grand halls, no sweet summer songs. Here men lived and died by their own hand and by the mercy of the wall. It was an ugly life, but it was honest. Maybe more honest than all the golden lies of King's Landing. Jon Snow met him atop the wall one evening, the wind almost tearing them from the narrow walkway. Jon's face was half hidden under the hood of his cloak, but Ned saw the shock in his eyes. "Father," Jon whispered, almost disbelieving. Ned pulled him into a rough hug, clapping his back hard. "I'm no lord here, Jon," he said quietly. "Only another crow." They stood together, side by side, gazing out over the frozen wilderness. It should have been a moment of peace. It should have felt like coming home, but there was a darkness on the horizon, and both of them could feel it. Later, over bitter ale in the mess hall, Ned learned the truth about the Night's Watch's troubles, rangers disappearing beyond the wall, dead men walking, whispers of creatures out of nightmare, with eyes like burning ice. Jon spoke of Benjen, Stark, still missing, of Samwell Tarly, who claimed to have seen a White Walker with his own eyes, of the growing tension among the wildlings, who were no longer raiding in small bands, but gathering into armies under a man they called King Beyond the Wall. Ned listened carefully. If the wildlings were truly uniting, if the old stories were proving true, then everything he had known, all the petty fights for thrones and crowns, was nothing compared to the real war looming in the dark. Yet the wall was weak. The Night's Watch, once a proud brotherhood, had shrunk to a few hundred ill-trained, half-starved men. They could barely guard their own gates, let alone defend the realm from a full invasion. One evening, Mormont summoned him to his quarters. The old bear was not a man to waste words. "We need leaders, Stark," Mormont said bluntly, "not broken men sulking over lost titles. If you mean to live here, you'll do your duty. You'll lead." Ned hesitated. Leadership was a heavy thing. It demanded sacrifices he wasn't sure he could make again. But deep down, he knew he had no real choice. Duty was the only thing he had left. "I will serve," Ned said. The old bear nodded, satisfied. "Good. You'll ride out with the next ranging party. We need to know what's happening beyond the wall. And we need someone who can command the respect of men." Respect. A funny thing, Ned thought. In King's Landing, respect had been bought with lies, blood, and treachery. Here it was earned through strength, through survival. Preparations began at once. Jon insisted on riding with him, and Ned didn't argue. The small group of rangers assembled, Corin Halfhand, a legend even among the Night's Watch. A few younger brothers eager to prove themselves, and Ghost, Jon's silent, white-furred direwolf. The night before they left, Ned stood at the top of the wall, staring into the endless dark. Somewhere out there, death was waiting, but he was no longer afraid of death. He had looked it in the face and walked away. Now he feared something far worse. The world he had known was crumbling, and if they failed beyond the wall, there would be no more north, no more south, no more kingdoms fighting over iron chairs. There would only be cold, endless, and merciless. He closed his eyes and whispered the old words, the ones that had guided him all his life. The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. Tomorrow he would swing the sword again, not for honor, not for glory, but because no one else would. The gates of Castle Black creaked open with a groan, like the cry of some ancient beast. Ned Stark rode out first, his black cloak snapping in the wind, his sword strapped across his back. Jon Snow followed closely behind him with Corin, Halfhand and the rest of the ranging party forming a grim line. They rode in silence at first. The only sounds the crunch of snow under hooves and the occasional low growl from Ghost, padding along beside Jon. The world beyond the wall was vast, endless, and utterly dead. The snow stretched on forever, blanketing the world in a suffocating, eerie quiet. After hours of riding, Corin finally broke the silence. "We won't find the king beyond the wall riding like this," he grunted. "He moves faster than us, smarter too." Ned nodded. "Then we move smarter. Find higher ground, look for their fires. Wildlings aren't ghosts. They still need warmth." They made camp that night beneath a rocky overhang, shielding themselves from the relentless wind. Jon tended to the horses, while Ned sharpened ice, the great sword that had once been his family's pride, now just another weapon in the war to come. Around the fire, Corin spoke of Mance Rayder, the king beyond the wall, a former brother of the Night's Watch who had abandoned his vows to unite the scattered wildling tribes. Mance wasn't just looking to survive. He was preparing for something much worse. "He's seen what's coming," Corin said, his voice low. "He knows the dead don't stay dead anymore." Jon looked over at Ned, his expression troubled. "Father, do you think the stories are true about the others?" Ned stared into the flames. In his heart, he already knew the answer. "Aye," he said at last. "I do. And if they are, then no throne in Westeros will matter one damn bit." The next few days were brutal. Freezing winds sliced through their heavy furs. Food ran low. Sleep was shallow and filled with uneasy dreams. Dreams of ice, of empty eyes watching from the trees. It was on the fourth day that they found it. A camp abandoned in haste. Fires still smouldering. Scraps of clothing and weapons scattered in the snow. And blood, so much blood, staining the white ground like spilled ink. Ghost prowled the perimeter, growling low and deep in his throat. Jon knelt beside a broken spear, its tip covered in dark, frozen blood. "They didn't just leave," he said grimly. "They were slaughtered." Ned moved carefully through the wreckage, every sense alert. He could feel it, something wrong in the air, a heavy, unnatural stillness. Then he saw the bodies. 3 wildlings, their eyes wide open, skin pale as frost, but there were no wounds, no signs of battle. "They froze?" one of the younger brothers asked, voice shaking. "No," Ned said quietly. "This is something else." As the rangers gathered around the bodies, one of the corpses twitched, a small, almost lazy movement, a finger curling against the snow. The men stumbled back, cursing and drawing weapons. Ned grabbed Jon by the shoulder and shoved him behind. Slowly, carefully, Ned raised ice. The corpse's eyes snapped open, and for a moment, Ned saw the truth. A blue so bright it burned. Inhuman, merciless. The thing lunged forward with an inhuman shriek faster than any dead thing had a right to be. Ice swung in a clean arc, severing its head from its body. The headless corpse collapsed, twitching violently before going still. Silence fell. The men stood frozen in place, hearts hammering in their chests. The young ranger who had spoken before dropped his sword and vomited into the snow. "We're not alone out here," Ned said grimly, wiping his blade clean. "And the wildlings aren't our only enemies." Corin's face was hard as stone. "We ride. Back to the wall, now. The old bear must know what we've seen." But deep down, Ned knew something else. It wasn't enough to run back and warn the others. The wall was no longer a border between kingdoms. It was the last defense of the living against a darkness that did not fear kings, castles, or crowns, and that darkness had already begun to move. The ride back to Castle Black was frantic. No more slow, careful scouting, no more cautious paths. They galloped hard through snow and wind, barely stopping even to breathe. Every shadow in the trees, every rustle in the dark felt like death reaching for them. By the time the wall came into sight, looming like a frozen mountain against the steel-grey sky, the horses were lathered in sweat, and the men were barely staying upright in their saddles. Jeor Mormont waited for them at the gates, grim-faced, flanked by black brothers clutching spears and crossbows. Ned swung off his horse and stalked straight toward the old bear, not bothering with the usual formalities. "We saw them," Ned said. His voice was hoarse from cold and shouting, but the urgency made it clear. The dead walk. Mormont's jaw tightened. You're certain? Jon spoke up. One of them came at us, after it was dead. The other rangers chimed in, each recounting the horror they'd witnessed. The fear was thick in the air now, creeping into every heart like a slow poison. Mormont didn't waste time doubting them. That was the one thing Ned appreciated about him. We must send ravens to Winterfell, to King's Landing, to every lord who still has the wits to understand. If the wall falls, it won't just be the north that burns. But Ned knew better than to believe that ravens would save them. Letters could be ignored. Warnings could be dismissed as northern superstition. Men sitting in warm castles would never believe in cold nightmares until it was too late. Later that night, as the brothers huddled inside Castle Black, trying to find comfort in fires that suddenly felt far too small, Ned sat alone, staring into the flames. His mind was heavy with doubt and old memories. He thought of Robert Baratheon, laughing and roaring with life, now dead because of politics and pride. He thought of Littlefinger's lies, of Cersei's treachery, of all the blood that had been spilled over an iron chair. None of it mattered now. The real war was not for thrones. It was for survival itself. Jon Snow joined him, dragging a bench close to the fire. He sat in silence for a long time, and Ned let him. Sometimes words only made the fear worse. Finally, Jon asked, "Do you think we'll survive this?" Ned didn't answer right away. He watched the flames dance and thought of winter storms, of empty villages buried under snow, of old stories old Nan used to tell, stories he had once thought were just that, stories. "I don't know," Ned said at last, honest as always, "but we have to fight. If we don't, there won't be anything left to survive for." The next few days were a whirlwind. Ravens were sent out in every direction, black wings cutting through grey skies. The brothers doubled the guard on the wall. Scouts were sent beyond the wall again, though many knew they might not return. But worse than all of it was the waiting. Waiting for an enemy that made no demands. Waiting for a death that would not come with banners or armies, but with silence and cold. One evening, just as the sun bled red against the horizon, the first warning came. The horn at the wall blew once, rangers returning. Relief flickered through Castle Black. Men rushed to the gates, expecting a few weary brothers, but then the horn blew again, twice, wildlings, and then, a third time, 3 blasts, the dead. Panic exploded through the courtyard. Men scrambled for weapons. Some dropped what they were holding and simply fled. Ned grabbed his sword and shouted, "Above the chaos! Form ranks, hold the courtyard!" Jon was already at his side, Ghost growling low and feral. Samwell Tarly stumbled forward, clutching a heavy crossbow, his hands shaking so hard he could barely hold it. The gates groaned as they were slammed shut. Brothers piled against them, trying to hold them fast. Outside, through the cracks, they could hear it, the shuffling scrape of footsteps, the low moan of things that should not live. The thud of fists, no, of bodies, throwing themselves against the wood. And over it all, the cold, a cold so deep it felt alive, creeping through the stones, crawling into their very bones. Ned tightened his grip on ice, his knuckles whitened. He turned to Jon, to Sam, to the terrified men who looked to him now not as a traitor or a broken lord, but as a leader. "Tonight," Ned Stark said, his voice steady as a sword in the forge, "we do not run. We do not beg. We are the shield that guards the realms of men. Remember your vows, and fight." The gates shuddered again, harder this time, and then, with a deafening crack, the dead poured in. The gates exploded inward with a crash that shook the very stones of Castle Black. The dead poured through in a black wave, their eyes burning blue in the half-light. Some were fresh, still wearing the rags of wildling clothes. Others were little, more than bones strung together by frozen sinew. But all of them moved with one mind, relentless, unstoppable. Ned Stark didn't hesitate. He stepped forward into the chaos, swinging ice in a great gleaming arc. The first corpse that lunged at him lost its head in one clean stroke. Still, more came, always more. All around him, the Black brothers fought desperately. Some fought well, others fought like terrified boys, flailing wildly, their fear almost more dangerous than the dead. Samwell Tarly fired his crossbow once, the bolt piercing a dead man's shoulder. It didn't even slow it down. Jon Snow fought beside Ned, quick and fierce. Ghost leapt and tore into the dead with savage fury, blood and rot spraying across the snow. But it was like trying to fight the ocean with a sword. You could cut down a dozen, and 20 more would take their place. The dead did not scream. They did not tire. They just kept coming. "Fall back to the inner yard," Ned roared. "Regroup." The surviving brothers stumbled back, dragging wounded comrades with them. Ned and Jon covered the retreat, their arms aching, lungs burning, blades flashing again and again. By the time they made it to the second gate, only a few dozen brothers remained standing. The dead slammed against the doors, rattling them on their hinges. Men jammed spears through the cracks, but it was only a matter of time. "We can't hold them," Jon gasped, blood dripping from a gash above his eye. Ned wiped gore from his face with the back of his hand. "Then we don't hold the gate, we burn it." Jon stared at him, stunned. "Burn Castle Black? Better ash than death walking through it," Ned said. "Go! Get torches, get oil." The brothers moved like men possessed. Barrels of lamp oil were rolled out, smashed against the doors and the walls. Torches were lit, the flames hungrily licking the cold air. As the dead smashed through the second gate, the fires roared to life. The wood crackled and screamed. Flames swallowed the entrance, climbing high into the night sky. The dead stumbled into the fire, mindless. Some burned, some kept coming, crawling through the flames like broken animals. But the fire slowed them, bought them precious minutes. In the chaos, Ned saw Sam stumbling, almost tripping over his own feet. A dead man, half-burned, lunged at him from the smoke. Without thinking, Ned threw his sword, the blade skewering the creature through the chest. It collapsed in a heap, twitching and smoking. Sam looked at him wide-eyed. "Thank you, my lord." "I'm no lord," Ned said harshly. "Not anymore. Now move." They regrouped again near the central tower, the last defensible place left in Castle Black. Men threw up makeshift barricades, barrels, crates, broken carts, anything they could pile between themselves and the inevitable slaughter. And then, for a moment, everything was still. The fires roared. The dead stood just beyond them, their blue eyes watching, waiting. "We buy time," Ned said quietly to the men around him. "Every minute we hold them here, every second we live. And it matters." Jon stepped up beside him, Longclaw gleaming in his hand. "To the last." Ned gave a faint, grim smile. He saw so much of himself in Jon, the same stubborn honor, the same quiet strength. It made his heart ache. When the dead surged forward again, it was like a dam breaking. They came at the barricades in a flood of bodies. The first wave broke against spears and swords, but the second crashed through, clawing, biting, dragging men down, screaming. Ned fought like a man possessed. Ice sang through the air, cutting down anything that moved. Jon fought at his side, back to back, the two of them a living wall against death. Sam fired bolt after bolt into the press of bodies, sobbing prayers under his breath. Ghost howled, his jaws snapping and tearing. For every dead man they cut down, 2 more came. One by one, brothers fell, men Ned had trained with, eaten with, fought beside, gone in an instant, swallowed by the endless cold. Still they fought, because there was no other choice. As the dead swarmed closer, Ned caught a glimpse of the wall in the distance, massive and silent under the stars. He thought of Winterfell, of Catelyn's face, of his children. He thought of Arya somewhere out there, of Sansa trapped in a golden cage, and he made a choice. "Jon!" he shouted, slamming his blade through another corpse. "Take whoever's left. Get to the wall, climb if you have to. Warn them, warn everyone. Jon hesitated. I'm not leaving you. You must. Ned roared more fiercely than he ever had. Your duty is to the living now. Go! For a moment, Jon's face twisted in agony. Then he nodded. Swift as a ghost, he grabbed Sam and the few surviving brothers, pushing them toward the wall. Ned turned back to the dead, raising ice high. He would hold the line. He would buy them time. He would die as he lived, protecting the realm of men. As the wave of death crashed over him, Ned Stark roared his defiance into the night. The cold took him, or at least it tried. Ned Stark fought until his arms were numb, until every muscle in his body screamed with pain. His blade, ice, heavy as a mountain, cleaved through the dead again and again. Around him, Castle Black burned. Smoke filled the air, choking him. The world was chaos and fire and death, yet somehow he still stood. The dead clawed at him, silent and merciless. One latched onto his arm, teeth snapping at his face, but Ned smashed the creature's skull against the stone wall. Another tried to drag him down, and he shoved ice through its chest, pinning it like a broken puppet. But they were endless. Even as he cut them down, he could feel the weight pressing in. His body faltered, his breath came in ragged, freezing gasps. His legs buckled once, then again. Somewhere, deep down, he knew this was the end, and yet he smiled. Because he had done it, he had given them a chance. Somewhere in the smoke and blood he heard Jon's voice, shouting orders, rallying the survivors toward the wall. He heard Ghost's furious growl, Sam's panicked breathing. They were alive, that was all that mattered. Then a cold hand closed around his throat. The thing that gripped him was not just dead, it was ancient. Its skin was stretched tight over bone, its armor blackened and cracked. Its eyes burned like twin stars of winter. A white walker. Ned struggled, but it was like fighting a storm made flesh. The thing lifted him effortlessly off his feet, its grip freezing the very blood in his veins. Ice slipped from Ned's fingers, clattering uselessly to the ground. The walker leaned close, its breath misting in the freezing air. It tilted its head, almost curious, as if studying a rare insect. Ned stared back, unflinching. If this was his death, he would meet it with open eyes. The walker raised a blade of pure crystal, sharp, cruel, and cold enough to crack steel. It drew back to strike, and then a flash of white fur, a snarl like a hurricane. Ghost hurled himself at the creature, fangs sinking into its side. The walker staggered, screeching, its deathly grip loosening. Ned dropped to the ground, coughing, gasping. His hands scrabbled for ice, finding it just as the walker turned back toward him, murder blazing in its frozen gaze. With a roar, Ned drove ice upward, burying the blade deep into the walker's chest. For a moment nothing happened. Then the creature shattered, not like flesh tearing or bone breaking, but like glass exploding into 1,000 shards. A blast of cold knocked Ned backwards, slamming him hard into the stones. When he opened his eyes, the White Walker was gone. Only glittering shards of ice remained, melting slowly into the blood-stained snow. Ghost limped to his side, blood matting his white fur, but his eyes were fierce, alive. Ned pulled himself to his knees, trembling. His body ached with wounds he couldn't even feel yet. But he was breathing. He was still breathing. He looked around the ruined courtyard. Fires smoldered in blackened heaps. Broken bodies, both living and dead, lay scattered across the stones. The few survivors who had stayed behind, a handful of black brothers, stared at him with wide, disbelieving eyes. He had killed a White Walker. For a long moment no one moved. Then slowly they began to rally. Spears were lifted, swords raised. Men who had been broken by terror now burned with new purpose. The dead had faltered when the walker fell. Some collapsed outright, as if cut from invisible strings. Others shambled in confusion, slower, less deadly. Without their master, they were vulnerable. "We fight!" Ned roared, hauling himself to. his feet. While they're weak, we fight. And fight they did, fueled by rage, by fear, by sheer stubborn will. The Black Brothers charged. They drove the dead back foot by bloody foot, reclaiming the burning ruins of Castle Black. By the time dawn broke over the wall, the dead were gone, burnt, broken, driven into the wilds beyond. The price had been terrible. More than half the Night's Watch lay dead. The wall itself was wounded, scarred, weakened, but they had survived. Ned Stark stood atop the wall as the sun rose, his black cloak snapping in the wind. Ghost sat at his side, silent and watchful. Below, Jon Snow and the others worked to clear the dead, to tend the wounded, to mourn the fallen. It wasn't victory, not really, but it was hope. And for now, that was enough. The wind at the top of the wall cut sharper than any blade. But Ned Stark barely felt it. He stood there, silent and grim, watching the aftermath unfold below him. Castle Black was half in ruins, its towers blackened and broken, its men battered and grieving. But they were alive, and now, with the sun rising and the dead retreating into the shadows, a new weight pressed down on Ned, heavier somehow than the sword or the fight. Word had to be sent. Not just to the north, not just to Winterfell, to all of Westeros. The realm had spent years playing at power, fighting over crowns and petty titles, while the real enemy grew in the cold places of the world. Now that enemy was moving, and they would not be stopped by walls or kings or dragons of old songs. They would only be stopped if the realm stood united. And Ned Stark knew better than anyone how broken and divided that realm truly was. Later, that day, the Black Brothers gathered what remained of their strength. Jon stood beside Ned, his face pale but resolute. Samwell Tarly hovered nearby, blood on his sleeves, eyes wide with the horror of what they had survived. "We have to send riders," Ned said, his voice carrying over the courtyard. "Not just ravens. Men who can speak the truth with their own mouths. Lords won't listen to letters. They barely listen to each other during peace. They won't listen during war, unless a living man stands in front of them and tells them the dead are coming." Mormont, bruised and weary, nodded heavily. "You'll have your riders." Ned turned to Jon. "You'll be one of them." Jon stiffened. "But the wall. The wall will hold for now," Ned said. "You must go south. Winterfell first. Then, King's Landing if you can. If you can get them to believe, if you can unite even a few, it might be enough." Jon's face darkened at the mention of King's Landing. He hadn't forgotten the lies, the betrayals. Neither had Ned, but that didn't matter anymore. "Tell Robb," Ned added, his voice roughening, "that the real war is here. Tell him the North must be ready." Jon nodded, jaw tight. Later that night, around a low fire in the broken mess hall, Ned sat with Ghost curled at his feet, listening to the whispers of the survivors. Men spoke of the fight, of the things they had seen, the dead walking, the White Walker shattered like glass. Fear ran through their voices like a river, but so did something else. Faith. For the first time in years, Ned Stark felt something. He had almost forgotten the weight of trust. These men, broken and battered though they were, looked to him as their anchor, their shield. They believed he could lead them through the darkness. He would not fail them. The next morning, Jon Snow, Samwell Tarly, and a few other strong riders prepared to leave. Horses were gathered, packs were filled with supplies. Each man was given a blade, a torch, and a simple heavy truth: trust no one until you see their heart. Jon stood before Ned, his cloak snapping in the icy wind. "I'll find them," Jon promised. "I'll make them listen." Ned put a hand on his shoulder. For a long moment he just looked at him, this boy, no, this man, who had been shaped by duty and pain and loss. "Remember who you are," Ned said, "and remember why you fight, not for crowns, not for names, for the living." Jon nodded once, and then he was gone, riding south like a shadow in the snow. As the gates closed behind the riders, Ned turned back toward the wall, toward the vast, endless dark beyond it. The real war was just beginning, and Ned Stark, who had survived betrayal, death, and the fury of a broken kingdom, now stood as the last shield against the coming night. He gripped the hilt of ice tighter. He lifted his head against the roaring wind. Let winter come. Let the dead rise. He was ready. The days that followed blurred into one long, bitter march of survival. The nights grew colder, darker, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Castle Black became a fortress of ghosts, half its brothers dead, the other half haunted by what they had seen. Every night Ned Stark walked the walls with Ghost at his side, watching the forests beyond for movement, knowing the dead were still out there. But the dead were not the only threat anymore. One evening, as the brothers patched the shattered gates and burned the remaining bodies, a horn sounded, once, then twice, not the signal for dead, but for riders, living men. Ned hurried to the gates, sword in hand, expecting Jon's party returned early or perhaps desperate survivors from beyond the wall. Instead, he found black banners flapping in the wind and hard men in rough furs, wildlings but not attacking. A tall figure rode forward, raising a hand in peace. His hair was streaked with grey, his cloak patched from 100 battles, and Ned recognized him instantly, Mance Rayder, the king beyond the wall. The Black brothers raised their weapons, in panic, but Ned stepped forward before anyone could act foolishly. "We come to talk," Mance called out, his voice carrying strong in the freezing wind. "We saw what broke the sky. We saw what walks." He dismounted and approached, alone, arms open. Ned met him halfway, ice heavy on his back. "You expect me to trust you," Ned said coldly. "I expect you to understand," Mance said, just as cold. "The wall isn't what matters anymore. The wall kept men out. It won't keep the dead out. We fight with you, or we all die." Behind Mance, hundreds of wildlings appeared in the mist. Men, women, even children, gaunt, desperate, hardened by the cruelest winters. Ned looked at them and saw not enemies. He saw more soldiers, more living souls to stand against the night. He made his decision then, swift and without regret. "You come south," Ned said. "You fight under my command. You take the Black. You swear the oath." Mance hesitated, a man not used to kneeling for anyone. But then he nodded. "Done," Mance said. That night, black cloaks were stitched for wildlings. Oaths were spoken. Some mumbled them, some roared them proudly. It didn't matter. Ned Stark had built something no lord or king in 1,000 years had done. He had united the living, and not a moment too soon. Because by dawn, the horns sounded again. 3 blasts. The dead had returned. This time, they came not in a scattered, ragged charge, but as an army, ranks upon ranks of silent, ice-eyed soldiers, stretching farther than the eye could see. Behind them, towering over the frozen battlefield, came the others, white walkers, their armor gleaming like ice, their blades thirsty for blood. Ned stood on the wall, looking down at the army of death. At his side stood the battered remnants of the Night's Watch, the wildlings and Ghost, snarling low. He felt no fear, only purpose. He turned to his men, his new brothers, his old enemies, and he spoke. "Today, we are not brothers of the Watch. We are not wildlings or southerners or lords or bastards." He pointed his sword toward the oncoming dead. "Today, we are the living." The gates opened, and they charged. Ned led the charge, ice blazing like a piece of the wall itself, carving a path through the ranks of the dead. Ghost leapt ahead, savage and swift. Arrows rained down from the walls. Wildling axes and Night's Watch swords clashed beside each other. It was not a clean battle. It was not a noble one. It was blood and screams and death. But it was a battle, where the living stood together, where the wall became not just stone and ice, but hope. Ned Stark fought until he could barely lift his sword, until the world around him was just white noise and burning cold. He fought until his body was broken, his blood freezing in his veins. And when he finally fell to one knee, battered and exhausted, he smiled, because behind him, rising over the wall, he saw a banner flying. Not the crowned stag, not the golden lion, not the three-headed dragon, but a direwolf, grey and proud, snapping against the wind. Winter had come, the dead had risen, but the North had remembered, and Ned Stark, who had once been sentenced to die for his honor, had lived long enough to save the world with it.